The first time I heard about the masked festival, I thought it was just another secret tradition dressed up as mystery for tourists. You know the type, a remote island, an event that only happens once a year, locals who smile politely but never answer direct questions, and a handful of grainy photos online that look more like dreams than documentation. But there was one detail that kept pulling at my attention like a thread caught on a nail. Nobody, in any of those images, had eyes you could truly see. Every face was covered. Every expression was carved, painted, stitched, or sculpted into something fixed. And somehow, those fixed expressions felt more alive than the people wearing them. I'm telling you this now the same way I'd tell a friend across a table at night, when the room is quiet and the outside world feels far away. Because this isn't a story about monsters jumping from shadows. It's a story about invitation, about permission, about how some doors only open when you agree to be welcomed. My name doesn't matter as much as what I was doing back then. I was a travel vlogger, small channel, loyal audience, the kind of creator who could stretch a weekend trip into 3 episodes if the lighting was good and the background music fit. I chased strange places, hidden customs, forgotten shrines, not to mock them, not to expose anything. I told myself I was preserving stories, giving people a glimpse of worlds they'd never see otherwise. And maybe at first that was true. The invitation arrived in an email with no subject line, no greeting, just a single sentence and an attachment. If you want to film what cannot be filmed, come to Kuroshima on the last new moon of winter. The attachment was a simple map, hand-drawn, and a ferry schedule that didn't match anything I could find on official sites. There was also a symbol in the corner, 3 curved lines wrapped around a circle, like a stylized eye that refused to be an eye. I should have deleted it. I didn't. I replied with one line, "Who is this?" The response came almost immediately. Someone who still remembers how to wear a face. 2 weeks later, I was standing at a small harbor under a sky the color of old paper. The ferry that arrived looked too plain for the amount of fear it stirred in me. No bright signs, no advertisements, just a boat with a name painted in fading letters and a crew that moved like they had no reason to hurry because time would always wait for them. There were only a few passengers. A woman carrying a wooden box wrapped in cloth, an older man with a paper charm tucked into the band of his hat, and a teenager with headphones who kept glancing at the water as if it might whisper something he didn't want to hear. No one spoke, not even the kind of small talk people use to fill the emptiness. The only sound was the sea tapping the hull, steady and patient. When I took out my phone to record a quick intro, just a harmless, "Hey guys, today we're going somewhere special," my screen flickered. The camera app opened, then closed. Opened, then closed again, like a nervous blink. I laughed under my breath because that's what you do when your fear tries to look like a technical problem. I restarted the phone. It worked, but the preview image looked slightly wrong. The colors were too muted, the shadows too deep. As if the device had already decided that whatever I was about to see belonged to a different kind of memory. The island appeared as a dark line on the horizon. Kuroshima. Black Island, someone had once translated it online, and I'd assumed it was poetic. But as we got closer, the cliffs really were dark, basalt or something like it, rising from the water like the spine of something sleeping. At the dock, there were no crowds, no welcoming banners, just a narrow road leading inland, and a wooden post with that same symbol carved into it, the 3 curved lines around a circle. Beneath it, in neat lettering, were words in English that didn't sound like a greeting at all. "Enter with a kind face." I remember swallowing, suddenly aware of my own expression, as if my mouth might betray me. I forced a smile. Not for anyone watching, there was nobody there, but because the sign felt less like advice and more like a rule. A short walk brought me to a small guest house. The owner was a woman with calm eyes and hands that smelled faintly of incense, like she'd been handling old fabric or paper charms. She didn't ask for my passport. She didn't ask why I came. She only looked at my face for a long moment, then handed me a key with a tag that had no room number, just the symbol. "Festival starts tonight," she said. Her English was careful, measured. "You may film, but do not ask anyone to remove their mask." I gave a quick nod, already planning my shots in my head. Street lanterns, drums, close-ups of painted wood. The mystery angle would do well with my audience. "Of course," I said, trying to sound respectful, professional, harmless. "I won't interfere." The woman's gaze didn't change, but the air between us did, like a curtain had been drawn. "It is not about interference," she said softly. "It is about invitation." That evening, as the sun sank and the island's narrow streets began to glow with lantern light, I stepped outside with my camera finally cooperating. The air carried music, slow drums, distant flutes, like a heartbeat learning a new rhythm. People moved toward the center of the village in small groups, all of them wearing masks. Some were elegant and smooth, painted in pale colors with delicate brows. Others were rough-hewn, with exaggerated smiles and hollow cheeks. And the strangest part was this: nobody looked uncomfortable. Nobody adjusted the straps or touched their faces. They wore those masks the way you wear your own skin, without thinking. I raised my camera to begin filming, and the screen flickered once again. For a split second, the crowd on my display wasn't wearing masks at all. Then the image snapped back to normal, and I heard a voice behind me, so close it felt like a breath near my ear. "You came without one," the voice said. I turned, and someone stood there holding a mask in both hands, offering it to me like a gift. "Tonight," they whispered, "everyone must have a face." The mask they offered me was lighter than I expected, like dried bark polished until it felt almost soft. It was painted a warm, gentle color, something between cream and pale gold, with a small closed-mouth smile that looked calm in a way that was almost practiced. The eyes were narrow slits, not holes, as if whoever carved it didn't want the wearer to see too much. I should have refused. I told myself I didn't need to wear anything to film, that I was an outsider, an observer. But the crowd kept moving, and the lanterns swayed, and the music threaded itself into my chest in a way that made refusal feel rude, even dangerous. And then I remembered the sign at the dock, "Enter with a kind face," so I accepted it. The person who handed it over wore a darker mask, black lacquer, sharp cheekbones, a smile carved too wide, like laughter stretched until it became something else. Their voice was calm, almost kind, but there was a warning tucked inside it. "Do not switch masks," they said, as if they were giving me a simple safety tip. "Do not let anyone touch the ties, and if someone calls your name, do not answer immediately." I gave a nervous little laugh. "Right," I said. "Like a game." They didn't laugh back. "Like a tradition," they replied, and then they melted into the moving crowd so smoothly that I couldn't tell where they went. I stepped into a side alley and put the mask on. The ties were old fabric, cool against my fingers. As soon as it settled on my face, the world changed just slightly, like someone had turned a dial I didn't know existed. The lantern light looked warmer. The shadows looked deeper. The drums sounded closer. And behind the music, faint but unmistakable, I heard something like soft breathing, close to my ear, inside the mask, as if the mask had lungs of its own. I told myself it was my imagination, my own breath echoing. That was the reasonable explanation. I walked toward the village center, camera in hand. At the main square, a circle had been marked on the ground with white powder, and around it were small stands selling sweets, rice wine, carved charms, and paper lanterns shaped like fish. It could have been a normal festival, the kind you'd see anywhere, if not for the masks and the quiet discipline of the crowd. People didn't shout, they didn't wave, they didn't point at me, even though I was clearly the only foreigner. They moved like they knew the script, like every step had been practiced. A group of children ran past me, their masks tiny and playful, cats and rabbits and foxes. One of them looked up at me as they passed, and I felt a cold pulse of dread because, for a moment, I couldn't tell if there was a child behind that mask at all. The eyes were too still, too focused, like someone older was looking out through something small. I lifted my camera and started filming anyway, narrating under my breath so I could add voiceover later. This is incredible. Traditional masks, local lanterns, very old ritual vibes. The camera stayed stable. The image looked beautiful, but when I zoomed in on a woman wearing a pale mask with red lips, the focus shifted strangely, and for half a second, the lens caught the space behind her mask. An empty darkness, like the inside of a hollow statue. I lowered the camera quickly. My heart was beating harder now, and I hated that I was afraid of something I couldn't prove was real. Then someone touched my shoulder. I flinched so sharply I almost dropped the camera. The person who touched me was a young man wearing a cracked ceramic mask, painted with thin blue lines that looked like rivers. His voice was careful, as if he didn't want to be overheard. "You're new," he said. I nodded. "Yeah, I'm just filming, if that's okay." He looked toward the circle marked on the ground. "It's allowed," he said. "They like witnesses, but don't film the unmasking." "There's an unmasking?" I asked before I could stop myself. His head tilted. "You don't know," he murmured, and his voice held genuine surprise. "Then why did you come?" I could have lied. I could have said I was invited, that I was chosen. Instead, I said the truth, because I thought it was interesting. The young man's shoulders stiffened. "Interesting," he repeated, like the word tasted wrong. Then he leaned closer and lowered his voice. "Listen to me. Some people come here to feel brave. Some come to steal stories. But the festival is not entertainment. It is maintenance." "Maintenance of what?" I asked. He didn't answer directly. He pointed with a subtle motion of his chin toward a small shrine at the edge of the square. It was simple, wooden, old, decorated with paper strips. In front of it sat a table piled with masks. Not for sale, not as decoration. They were arranged like offerings. Some were beautifully made, some were grotesque. Some looked like they had been worn so long the paint had absorbed sweat and tears and something darker. "You see those masks?" he asked. "They're not costumes, they're seals." The word hit me strangely. "Seals," I repeated. "Faces are doors," he said very softly. "Most people don't know that. Most people think their face is just a face, but here they remember. So once a year they wear these seals so what's inside stays inside, and what's outside stays out." I wanted to laugh, but my throat wouldn't cooperate. "And if someone doesn't wear one?" His gaze shifted to me. "Then something else might." Before I could ask what he meant, the drums changed rhythm. The slow heartbeat became faster, sharper, like a warning. The crowd began to form a wider circle around the white-marked ring. People stepped into place with the precision of a ritual that had survived centuries. A figure appeared at the far side of the ring, taller than the others, wearing a mask unlike anything else I'd seen, smooth, pale, almost blank, with only the faintest hint of a smile. No eyebrows, no wrinkles, just calm emptiness. The ties were red. The crowd lowered their heads in unison. The young man whispered, "That one is called the host." The host raised a hand, and the music softened until only a low drum remained. The host's voice carried across the square, not loud, but somehow perfectly clear. "Tonight," they said, "we wear kindness, we wear restraint, we wear the faces that keep us safe." A murmur moved through the crowd, not like applause, but like agreement. The host continued, "And tonight, we welcome one who came without a face." My stomach dropped. Because even though I was wearing the mask now, I knew, somehow, that the host was talking about me. The host's head turned slowly until those narrow eye slits faced directly toward where I stood. And then, from inside my mask, I heard breathing again, deeper this time, like a quiet laugh held in someone's chest. The young man grabbed my wrist, hard. "Don't move," he hissed. Don't react. Whatever you do, don't react like prey." The host lifted a finger and pointed, straight at me. "Come forward," the host said gently. "Show us your borrowed face." My feet felt heavy, like the ground had thickened into mud. My camera hung at my side, recording without me even realizing it. I took one step, then another, pulled as much by the weight of eyes as by my own instinct to obey. As I entered the ring, the white powder line looked less like decoration and more like a boundary. I felt the air change the moment I crossed it, as if the world outside the circle was one temperature and the world inside was another, colder, cleaner, sharper. The host stood a few feet away from me, close enough that I could see tiny scratches in the mask's surface, as if it had been used for a very long time. "You are welcome," the host said. The words were polite, but my fear didn't ease. "Tell us," the host continued, "why you came." 100 masked faces watched me in silence. I tried to speak, but my voice came out thin. I came to film, to share your festival." The host tilted their head slightly. "To share," they repeated. A generous word. I could feel sweat forming under my mask. The ties itched against my neck. The host stepped closer. "Do you know what happens when a story is taken?" they asked. "When something sacred is made into a souvenir?" I swallowed. "I didn't mean—" The host raised a hand, and my words died in my throat. "Tonight," they said, "we will teach you the difference between watching and being welcomed." Then the host reached behind their head and began to pull at the red ties of their mask. The crowd made a sound, one soft inhale, shared, like the whole village breathed in at once. The young man outside the ring mouthed something to me, frantic, but I couldn't hear him over the blood rushing in my ears. The host lifted the mask slowly, carefully, as if removing it was dangerous. For the briefest moment, the underside of the mask caught the lantern light, and I saw carved into the inside surface a line of tiny symbols, like the same eye-like mark repeated again and again, binding something shut. The host's mask cleared their face, and what was underneath was not a monster, not a corpse, not a rotting horror, nothing so simple. It was a face that looked exactly like mine, not similar, not could be a relative. Exactly mine, down to the small scar near my jaw that only I knew about. The host smiled with my mouth and spoke with my voice. "Now," they said, "answer when we call you." For a second, my mind tried to solve it like a normal problem. Bad lighting? A prank? Someone wearing a hyper-realistic mask? A coincidence so weird it felt personal? Anything except the impossible truth sitting a few feet in front of me, wearing my face like it belonged to them. The host's eyes, my eyes, looked calm, not cruel, not angry, just certain. And that certainty was worse than rage because it made me feel like the outcome had already been decided. "Now," the host repeated gently, still speaking with my voice, "answer when we call you." The crowd waited. A perfect ring of masks. No murmurs, no laughter, no phones held up for photos. Everyone watching like this was the most normal thing in the world. I forced air into my lungs. "This isn't funny," I said, and the sound of my own voice echoing inside my mask felt wrong, like I was hearing myself through a wall. "Who are you?" The host smiled wider, my smile but not mine. "Who I am," they said, "depends on whether you accept the welcome." "Accept the welcome," I repeated, trying to keep my tone steady. "You mean the mask?" The host's gaze flicked, just briefly, to the ties behind my head. "You came without a face," they said. "So you borrowed one. That was polite. That was wise. But a borrowed face is temporary. Tonight, we decide what becomes permanent." My hands went cold. I glanced toward the edge of the ring, searching for the young man with the cracked ceramic mask. I found him standing rigid, both hands clenched at his sides. His mask was facing me, but it was the angle of his body that told me everything. He was ready to run or fight or do something desperate. He made a small motion with his fingers, slow, deliberate, as if signaling "don't speak." Then the host called out, clear as a bell, using my full name. Hearing it said aloud in that square, by my own mouth, hit me like a shove. It was too intimate, too precise, the way a mother calls you when she's not asking, she's commanding. I opened my mouth on instinct and stopped, because I remembered what I'd been told at the start. If someone calls your name, do not answer immediately. A simple rule, a small superstition, the kind of thing you forget until it suddenly matters more than anything else. The host's smile didn't fade, but the air changed again, the way it does when a room realizes you didn't follow the expected script. "Come," the host said, softer now, as if coaxing an animal. "Answer. Let the island know you are truly here." Behind the calm tone, I heard something else, faint, like a thread pulled tight. A pressure, like the moment before a decision locks into place. I tried to buy time. "Why do you need me to answer?" I asked. The host tilted their head. "Because names are handles," they said, "and a guest with no handle can slip away. We do not want you to slip away, not yet." The crowd leaned forward slightly, almost imperceptibly, but it made my skin crawl, a ring tightening. The host spoke again, my name once more, patiently, like repeating a question to someone pretending not to hear. My throat worked, but I kept my mouth shut. I stared at the host's face, my face, and it struck me then that it wasn't perfectly alive. It moved correctly, yes. It blinked, it smiled, it breathed. But there was a smoothness to it, like a performance too flawless to be human. Like an actor who never breaks character because the character is all they are. The host took one step closer. The white powder line was still behind me now. I was deep inside the circle, close enough that if I reached out, I could touch the host's cheek and feel what was real. Instead, I did the only thing I could think of. I raised my camera. The moment the lens pointed at the host, the screen glitched, hard, like the device couldn't decide what to show. The image skipped between frames. The host with my face, the host with the pale blank mask, the host with something else entirely, something blurred and featureless, like a face that hadn't been finished yet. And then the camera stabilized. On my screen, the host looked normal. Too normal. Perfect lighting, perfect focus, like the camera was choosing the least alarming version of the truth. The host's eyes lowered to my camera. "Ah," they said, almost fondly. "You brought a second set of eyes. A witness machine." I tried to speak, but no sound came out. The fear was thick now, not sharp. Thick, like syrup. Slow panic. The host lifted one hand, palm up, offering. "Give it to me," they said. "Your machine cannot keep what is not welcomed." "But I can. I can keep it safely." "No," I said, and the word came out harsher than I intended. A ripple moved through the crowd. No voices, just a shift, a collective reaction. The host's smile remained, but the warmth behind it cooled by a few degrees. "Refusal," the host said softly, "is also an answer." My stomach tightened. I understood then, in a way that didn't need logic. The island wasn't asking for my belongings. It was asking for my agreement, my consent, a tiny surrender that would become a chain. The host called my name again. I kept my lips pressed together. The pressure in the air increased, subtle but unmistakable, like a storm charging somewhere behind the lantern glow. The edges of my vision seemed to darken, not from fainting, but from something else stepping closer. Then, from outside the ring, the young man with the cracked ceramic mask moved. He didn't run in. He didn't shout. He did something stranger. He stepped forward to the powder line and knelt, placing his hands flat on the ground, fingers spread. His posture was respectful, almost prayerful. Then he spoke, not loudly but clearly, words in a language I didn't understand. As he spoke, the drums faltered. The rhythm stumbled, like someone lost the beat. The host's head snapped too fast toward him. The crowd stiffened. A sharp, collective inhale again. The young man continued, voice steady, repeating the phrase like a lock being turned over and over. As he spoke, the white powder line began to look brighter, as if the lantern light was concentrating there. The boundary wasn't just a decoration, it was active. The host stepped toward the kneeling man, and for the first time, the host's calm tone cracked. "You would interrupt a welcome?" the host asked. The young man didn't stop. He didn't look up. He kept speaking. And then, like a sudden wave, the pressure around me eased just enough for me to think clearly. Just enough to move. The young man's fingers twitched in a small, urgent gesture. Now. I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran toward the powder line. The crowd didn't grab me. Nobody tackled me. That would have been too ordinary. Instead, as I sprinted, every masked head in the circle turned to follow me in perfect unison, and the lantern light seemed to tilt, like the shadows wanted to watch too. I reached the boundary and jumped over it. The instant my foot landed on the other side, the world snapped back into a more normal shape. The air warmed. The drums resumed a steadier rhythm, as if someone had regained control. I stumbled, nearly falling, and the young man grabbed my arm and hauled me upright. "Don't look back," he whispered. But of course I looked back. Inside the ring, the host stood perfectly still wearing my face, still smiling. And then the host lifted a hand, slowly, almost gently, and waved at me, a friendly farewell, the kind of gesture you make to a guest leaving your home. Except I knew, deep in my bones, that I wasn't leaving. Not really. The young man pulled me away into a narrow alley, away from the square, away from the circle of masks. We ran until the music became distant and the lantern light thinned into darkness. Only when we were out of sight did he stop. He pressed his forehead against the wall for a moment, breathing hard. Then he turned to me, and even with his mask on, I could feel the seriousness in the way he held himself. "You cannot stay here without a mask," he said, "and you cannot leave with a borrowed one." My hands rose to the ties behind my head without thinking. The fabric suddenly felt heavier, as if it had gained weight while I wasn't paying attention. "What do you mean I can't leave?" I asked. The young man's voice dropped to almost nothing. "Because if they called your name and you answered, they would have welcomed you completely. They would have had a handle on you. Tonight you resisted. That buys time. But the host has your face now." My blood went cold. "So what happens?" He hesitated, and that hesitation frightened me more than any dramatic answer. "Sometimes," he said finally, "the island keeps what it likes. Not the body, the identity, the place you occupy in the world." I swallowed. "And the host?" The young man's cracked mask angled toward me. "The host is what happens when a face is worn too long," he whispered, "when the seal becomes the skin." A distant drumbeat rolled through the night like a slow warning. Then, from somewhere deeper in the village, drifting through the dark streets like a gentle invitation, I heard it again. My name. Spoken softly, close enough to feel like it was right behind my ear. The young man didn't wait for me to respond. He grabbed my sleeve and guided me farther down the alley until we reached a small side courtyard behind a row of closed stalls. The lantern light barely reached here. It smelled like damp wood and old paper, the kind of quiet place where secrets feel comfortable. "Listen," he whispered, his voice steady but urgent. "If you hear your name again, you do not answer. Not even by accident. Not even to whisper, 'What?' under your breath. Nothing. Silence is the only thing they can't hold." My heart was still hammering. I tried to breathe slowly, like I could talk my body out of panic. "Who are you?" I asked. "Why are you helping me?" He hesitated, then said, "Call me Ren." He didn't offer more, and I didn't push. Not because I was polite, because I didn't want to waste the time he'd bought me. Ren reached into the sleeve of his jacket and pulled out something folded carefully, like it mattered. A strip of paper, creased and worn, with that same symbol drawn in ink, 3 curved lines around a circle. "This is a ward," he said. "It won't save you forever, but it can blur you for a moment, like fog on glass." He pressed it against the side of my mask. The paper clung as if the surface had become slightly tacky. My skin prickled under the mask, and for a second I felt a faint tugging sensation, like a thread being pulled loose from my face. "What are these masks?" I asked, my voice shaking despite my effort to sound calm. "You said they're seals. Seals for what?" Ren leaned closer, as if even the darkness could eavesdrop. "For what lives between people," he said. "Between faces, between roles. The island believes a person is partly what others see: a teacher, a child, a stranger, a friend, a name, a face. When enough people agree on who you are, it becomes firm." I stared at him. "That sounds like psychology," I muttered, trying to anchor the horror to something rational. Ren shook his head. "No," he said. "It's older than psychology. It's a rule, like gravity. Most places ignore it, so it stays quiet. This island remembers it, so it becomes loud." My fingers drifted again to the ties behind my head. The mask felt tighter now, like it had settled in. "You said I can't leave with a borrowed face." Ren nodded. "Borrowed masks are meant to be returned. If you cross the water with one still tied on, the island can follow the handle back to you, and if you remove it wrong—" He stopped, as if choosing his words carefully. "You may not like what tries to look out through your face afterward." My mouth went dry. "So what do I do?" Ren exhaled slowly. "There's a way out," he said. "But it has rules." He held up one finger. "First, you must never let the host hear you answer to your name." A second finger. "Second, you must return the borrowed mask to the shrine table before dawn. Not to a person, not to the ground, to the table." A third finger. "Third, you need a substitute face." I blinked. "A substitute face?" Ren's cracked mask tilted. "A mask that belongs to you," he said. "Not a borrowed one. One you choose. One you accept. It sounds harmless, but it's the difference between being claimed and being covered." That was when I realized how the rule at the dock really worked. Enter with a kind face. It wasn't advice about being friendly. It was a warning about what happens if you enter unprotected. "And where do I get one?" I asked. Ren pointed deeper into the village, away from the bright square. "There's a workshop," he said. "Not a shop for tourists, a real one, the last mask maker who still carves by hand. If he's willing, he can make you a face before dawn." "Before dawn?" I repeated. Ren nodded. "Because at dawn," he said, "the unmasking happens." The word made my stomach twist. "What is it?" I asked. Ren's voice lowered further. "They remove the seals," he whispered, "and show what stayed inside all year. They do it so it doesn't leak into daily life, like draining a storm." My mind flashed to the moment my camera had flickered, how it had shown the crowd without masks for a split second. I swallowed. "And you said don't film it." Ren's hands clenched. "If you film the unmasking," he said, "you give it a second home. Images are not neutral here. A recording is a doorway." My grip tightened on my camera. I hadn't turned it off since the ring. I didn't know why. Habit, fear, proof. But now it felt like holding a lit match in a room full of dry paper. Ren glanced at the device. "Turn it off," he said. I tried. My thumb hit the power button. The screen went black, then lit up again on its own. Not to my home screen, to the camera. The lens pointed at nothing but darkness, yet the preview image showed the festival square. It was live. The host stood in the ring, still wearing my face, looking directly into the lens like it knew I was watching. The crowd was still, waiting, the lantern swaying like slow breathing. Then the host lifted a hand and pressed a finger to its lips, my lips, in a quiet shh. My blood turned to ice. Ren saw the look on my posture and leaned in. "What is it?" I tilted the screen toward him. Even behind his cracked mask, I could feel his alarm. "They're using it," he whispered. "They're looking through it." I stabbed at the buttons again. The screen flickered, glitched, and for a second the host's face blurred into that unfinished, featureless shape, like a mannequin head with no details. Then it snapped back to my face, smiling. The host spoke, but no sound came from the phone. Still, I could read the lips because they were mine. "Come back." I yanked the battery pack cable from the camera rig, frantic, and the screen finally died. I stood there shaking as if I'd just slammed a door on something that was already halfway through. Ren grabbed my wrist. "We move now," he said, "before they decide you're entertaining." We slipped through back streets, keeping to the shadowed lanes where the lanterns were sparse. The village felt different now. Not like a festival, but like a stage between scenes. The music was still there, but muffled. The air carried the smell of incense and sea salt and something faintly metallic like coins warmed in a hand. Every so often I thought I heard my name floating somewhere behind us. But it wasn't shouted. It was soft, patient, like someone calling a cat that always comes eventually. Ren stopped at a narrow door set into the side of an old building. There was no sign, just the carved symbol scratched into the wood, faded with age. He knocked in a pattern, 3 short taps, a pause, then 1 long tap. For a moment, nothing. Then the door opened a crack and a single eye stared out at us from behind a half mask that covered only the upper face. The lower half of the man's face was visible, lined, calm, tired. Ren spoke quietly. "Sensei, we need a face made before dawn." The man's eye narrowed. "For him?" he asked, and his gaze slid to me. I felt suddenly exposed, like the borrowed mask wasn't protecting me anymore, like it was advertising me. The man opened the door wider. Inside, the room was dim and warm, lit by a single lamp. Masks lined the walls, hanging like silent witnesses. Some were beautiful, some were frightening, but all of them looked intentional, like every curve had meaning. The man stepped back. "Enter," he said, "and close the door." We did. The moment the latch clicked, the sound of the festival outside seemed to drop away, as if the workshop existed in a pocket of quieter reality. The mask maker looked at me for a long time. Not at my clothes, not at my camera, at the mask I was wearing. "Borrowed," he said, almost to himself. Then he looked at Ren. "You brought trouble." Ren didn't deny it. "He didn't answer," Ren said. "Not yet." The mask maker's visible mouth tightened. "Not yet," he echoed. Then he turned to me. "Do you understand what is happening to you?" I swallowed. "The host has my face," I said, "and I'm not sure if I still do." The mask maker nodded slowly, as if that was the correct answer. Then he walked to a low table and picked up a block of pale wood, smooth and uncarved. "This is the only kindness I can offer," he said. "I can carve you a face that is yours, if you are honest with me." My throat felt tight. Honest how? He placed the wood on the table, set his tools beside it, and said a sentence that made the room feel colder. "Tell me," he said, "what expression you wear when no one is watching." Before I could answer, the borrowed mask on my face made that faint breathing sound again. Deep, pleased, like someone smiling behind my skin. And from somewhere beyond the workshop walls, through wood and distance and night, I heard my name once more, closer than before, not from the village, from right outside the door. The moment I heard my name from outside the workshop door, every muscle in my body tried to respond, not because I wanted to, because my name felt like a hook in the air, and some part of me still believed that answering would make the tension stop. Like when someone calls you in a crowded room and you reply just to end the searching. But Ren's hand snapped up and clamped over my mouth through the mask, firm and steady. His eyes, hidden behind cracked ceramic, stayed locked on mine as if to say, "Don't even breathe in a way that sounds like yes." The mask maker didn't move. He didn't rush to the door. He didn't ask who it was. He simply set one of his carving tools down with delicate care, like a surgeon placing an instrument on a tray, and said quietly, "Do not give it your voice." Outside, my name came again, softer this time, almost affectionate, the kind of tone you use when you're trying to calm someone down. "It's all right," the voice added in perfect English. "Come out, we can fix this." My stomach turned, not because it sounded threatening, but because it sounded reasonable. The voice had learned exactly what kind of fear I had, the fear of making a mistake with no way back, and it was offering relief. Ren leaned close to my ear. "That's not a person," he whispered. "That's a handle looking for the right grip." The mask maker finally lifted his chin, as if acknowledging an annoying wind. "They want you to answer," he said, "because answers make agreements. Agreements make doors, and doors make you easy to carry." Outside, the voice shifted again, still calm, still gentle. Now using my own voice, matching my rhythm, my small pauses, my way of stretching certain vowels. It sounded like an audio clip taken from one of my videos. "Guys," the voice said, playful, almost embarrassed, "I'm okay. I'm just stuck. Open the door." Ren's grip tightened on my shoulder. I realized then that this wasn't just the host talking. This was the island learning me, sampling me, wearing me in sound the same way it had worn me in face. The mask maker reached into a drawer and pulled out a small bell, dull bronze, the kind you'd see on a shrine. He didn't ring it, he simply held it, and the room seemed to sharpen around the object, like the air itself was paying attention. "Ren," he said softly, "seal the latch." Ren nodded and took the paper ward from earlier, the one with the eye-like symbol, and pressed it to the metal latch. He whispered the same phrase he'd used at the powder line, slow and steady. The paper warmed under his fingers. The sound from outside didn't stop, but it thinned, as if the door had suddenly grown thicker. My name was called again, but now it sounded farther away, like someone speaking down a long hallway. The mask maker set the bell on the table and looked directly at me. "Now," he said, "we carve." My throat was dry. I tried to speak, but Ren's hand was still covering my mouth. Ren let go only when the mask maker held up one finger, an order, not a request. I swallowed and forced myself to keep my voice low. "You asked what expression I wear when no one is watching," I said, and even hearing myself say it felt strange, like I was confessing something I'd never put into words. The mask maker nodded once. "Yes," I hesitated. In the dim workshop, surrounded by masks that looked like they'd absorbed decades of secrets, I understood that the wrong answer would make the new mask meaningless. A mask wasn't just wood. It was an agreement with myself, a chosen face. "I think," I began, then stopped, because I wanted to lie. I wanted to sound brave, kind, uncomplicated. But the mask maker's visible eye stayed steady, waiting like a mirror that doesn't react. So I told the truth. "When no one is watching," I said, "I look tired, not just physically, like I'm performing being okay, and when the performance ends, my face falls." Ren went very still beside me, as if he recognized the feeling. The mask maker didn't judge. He didn't comfort me. He simply picked up the pale block of wood and turned it in his hands. "Tired," he repeated softly, "and performing." Outside, my name came again, now with a hint of patience, wearing thin, like a smile held too long. "You can stop this," the voice murmured. "Just answer." I didn't. I stared at the wood. The mask maker began to carve. The first cuts were gentle, almost lazy, but they revealed something startling. He wasn't carving a stranger's face. He wasn't carving my features. He was carving an expression, the shape of a truth, the downward pull at the corners of the mouth, the heaviness around the eyes, a softness that wasn't sadness exactly, more like the moment after you've smiled for too long and you finally let yourself be real. As the mask took form, the breathing inside my borrowed mask changed, It didn't sound pleased now. It sounded annoyed, like someone shifting in a chair, uncomfortable. Ren noticed too. He leaned close. "It doesn't like this," he whispered. "Why?" I whispered back. "Because you're making a face it can't imitate easily," Ren said. "The host wears what people expect, what people recognize, but this," he nodded toward the carving, "is private." The voice outside stopped calling my name for a moment. Silence pressed against the door like a listening ear. Then the voice spoke again. Different now, less gentle, more intimate. "I know you," it said softly. "I know the face you make when the camera turns off." My blood went cold. The mask maker's carving didn't slow. "Ignore it," he said, calm as stone. "It talks like that because it needs your attention. Attention is another kind of answer." Time stretched. The workshop lamp hummed. Wood shavings gathered like pale curls on the floor. Every few minutes, the voice outside tried a new approach. Friendly, concerned, persuasive, familiar. It called my name with different emotions, testing which version made my chest loosen, which version tempted my lips to open. I resisted by doing something surprisingly hard. I focused on nothing but silence. I didn't even whisper to Ren. I didn't even sigh. I became, for those long minutes, a person without a handle. Finally, the mask maker held the carved mask up to the light. It wasn't scary. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't beautiful in the way tourist masks were beautiful. It was simple, honest, and a little weary. The mouth wasn't smiling, but it wasn't frowning either. It looked like a person who had stopped pretending just for a moment. "This," the mask maker said, "is your substitute face." He offered it to me with both hands, like a ritual object. My fingers trembled as I took it. The wood felt warm, as if it had been held against someone's skin for a long time. I brought it close, and I could smell something faint, incense and fresh-cut wood and the sea. Ren whispered, "Now what?" The mask maker's eye flicked to the window. Beyond the workshop, the night had thinned. The darkest hours were passing. Dawn was approaching, slowly and inevitably. "Now," the mask maker said, "you return what you borrowed, before sunrise." My stomach clenched. "The shrine table," I murmured. He nodded. "And you do it quietly. You do it without bargaining. You do it without looking for applause." Ren shifted his weight. "And the new mask?" he asked. The mask maker's gaze returned to me. "You will wear it," he said, "but not yet." I stared at him. "Why not?" "Because the borrowed mask is still on you," he said. "If you rush, you will tangle two faces together, and tangled faces are hard to separate." Outside, the voice came again, closer than it should have been. "You don't have to do this," it said, and this time it sounded tired, like it had dropped the performance and was speaking honestly. "Come back, I'll make it easy." Ren stiffened. I felt my pulse spike, because the voice sounded so much like me now that I couldn't tell where the imitation ended and my own memory began. The mask maker walked to the door. He didn't open it. He pressed his palm against the wood and spoke quietly, not in English. The words were short, firm, final. The voice outside went silent. For one long moment, there was nothing but the workshop lamp and our breathing. Then, from the other side of the door, something tapped. 3 short taps, a pause, 1 long tap. The same pattern Ren had used. Ren's head snapped toward the door. "That's our knock," he whispered. The mask maker didn't look surprised. He looked resigned. "It learns quickly," he said. My fingers tightened around the new mask. I imagined stepping outside and seeing the host waiting in the lantern glow, wearing my face again, smiling like a patient host greeting a guest who wandered off. The mask maker turned back to me. "You have time," he said, "but not much. Go now. Return the borrowed face." Ren reached for my arm. "Stay close," he whispered. "No speaking, no answering, no looking back." We moved to the back exit of the workshop, slipping into a narrow passage that smelled like wet stone. The village's festival sounds were distant now, but the air felt charged. like the whole island was holding its breath for dawn. As we hurried toward the shrine, my camera, dead and silent, felt heavy against my side, like an object that had seen too much. And then, from somewhere ahead of us, just beyond the next corner, I heard footsteps. Slow, unhurried. A familiar voice followed. My voice, soft and welcoming. "You're doing great," it said. "Now bring the mask back and come home." The footsteps ahead didn't rush us. They didn't need to. They were the footsteps of something that believed time belonged to it. Ren stopped so suddenly I almost bumped into him. He raised one hand, palm out, a silent command. Freeze. In the dim corridor between buildings, the lantern glow from the main square barely reached us, but I could still make out a figure at the far end of the lane, standing where the path narrowed, blocking the cleanest route to the shrine. The figure wore the pale, almost blank mask again. Red ties. The host. Even from a distance, the posture felt familiar in the worst way. Calm, welcoming, patient. Like someone waiting at a door they're sure you'll walk through. And then the host spoke in my voice, soft and encouraging, as if guiding me through a difficult moment. "You're doing great," it said. "Now bring the mask back and come home." Ren leaned close to my ear, barely moving his head. "Don't look at it too long," he whispered. "If you start recognizing it, you'll start agreeing with it." I forced my eyes down, focusing on the stones under my feet. My fingers tightened around the new mask the mask maker had carved, my substitute face, still warm from the workshop lamp. The host took a step forward. The sound of its sandals on stone was gentle, almost polite. "You're lost," it said, and my own tone made the words feel strangely reasonable. "I can walk you back." Ren's hand slid into his pocket. I saw the edge of a paper ward between his fingers. He didn't lift it yet. He was waiting for the right moment, like a person waiting for a breeze before lighting a match. The host called my name again, not loud, not sharp, just a quiet invitation, like a friend calling you from across a room. I kept my mouth shut. I kept my breathing shallow. I tried not to react at all, because I understood now what everyone on the island already knew. Reactions were agreements in disguise. The host's head tilted slightly. "Still refusing," it murmured. The calm tone didn't crack, but something beneath it tightened. "You know. This becomes harder the longer you pretend you don't hear me." Ren stepped forward half a pace, just enough to place himself between me and the host. He spoke, not in English, in the same careful cadence he'd used earlier. A short phrase, repeated once, then again. The air thickened. The lantern light above us flickered like a blink. The host paused, and for the first time I felt it hesitate. Not fear, something more like annoyance, like a lock resisting the wrong key. Ren whispered without moving his lips, "Now, walk, don't run." We moved sideways into a narrower passage, barely more than a gap between walls, where the host's body couldn't follow in a straight line. I didn't look back, but I felt it behind me the way you feel someone standing too close in an elevator. A soft laugh drifted after us. My laugh, the one I used on camera when I was trying to seem relaxed. "Clever," the host said. We reached the back of the shrine square as the night began to thin into early morning. The festival had changed. It was quieter now. The drums were slower, like a heartbeat approaching rest. People still moved in masks, but their steps were measured, as if everyone was preparing for something final. The shrine table was exactly where I'd seen it earlier, stacked with masks arranged like offerings. The symbol was carved into the table's side, repeated in a looping pattern like a binding. Ren gripped my wrist. "No hesitation," he whispered. "Return it like it was never yours." I stepped forward. My borrowed mask felt heavier than ever, as if it didn't want to leave. The fabric ties at the back of my head seemed tighter, the knot more stubborn, like the mask had decided to stay. And then I realized the most terrifying part. I didn't remember tying it that tightly. Ren held up the paper ward, his fingers steady. He pressed it gently against the side of my mask, near the temple, and whispered the phrase again, soft, firm, almost tender. For a brief moment, the breathing inside the mask stopped. The pressure eased. My hands rose behind my head, and this time the knot loosened as if it had been waiting for permission. I pulled the ties free and lifted the borrowed mask away from my face. The air on my skin felt cold and shockingly bright, even in the dim light, like my real face hadn't been touched by wind in hours. I didn't look at the inside of the borrowed mask. I didn't inspect it. I didn't treat it like a souvenir. I simply placed it on the shrine table among the others, exactly as the rule demanded. The moment it touched the wood, the drums in the distance faltered, just once, like a skipped heartbeat. Ren's hand tightened on my shoulder. "Don't stop," he whispered. I lifted the new mask, my substitute face, and brought it toward my skin. For a split second, fear surged through me. Not fear of the mask, fear of what I'd feel underneath it. Fear of admitting, in a way I couldn't undo, that I needed a face to survive this place. Then I remembered the dock sign. Enter with a kind face. Kind didn't mean happy. Kind didn't mean smiling. Kind meant careful, honest, not forcing the world to hold something it didn't agree to hold. I tied the new mask on. It settled gently, like it belonged there. The wood didn't feel like a clamp or a trap. It felt like a boundary I chose. My breath sounded normal again. No extra breathing, no hidden laugh. Ren exhaled as if he'd been holding his breath for hours. "Good," he whispered. The crowd around the shrine was still masked, but the energy had shifted. People were moving toward the main ring again. Dawn was close. The unmasking was near. Ren leaned in. "Now we leave," he said, before the host notices what changed. We turned away from the shrine and moved through the thinning darkness toward the harbor road. The island felt watchful, but not as sharp, like something had missed its chance and was recalculating. As we walked, I noticed something unsettling. A few villagers glanced at me, and their masked faces seemed to pause just slightly, as if trying to recognize me and failing. Like my substitute face made me unreadable. Good. I wanted to be unreadable. We reached the harbor just as the sky began to pale at the horizon. The ferry was there, quiet, plain, as if nothing unusual had happened all night. A few passengers stood waiting, all wearing masks. Even here, even at the edge. Ren stopped beside me at the dock and spoke quickly, low. "Once you leave the island," he said, "do not speak about your real name while thinking about the host. Don't connect the two in your mind. Connections are bridges." I swallowed. "Are you coming?" I asked. Ren shook his head. "I can't," he said simply. "This is my home. This is my responsibility." I wanted to argue. I wanted to ask a dozen questions. What he'd seen, what he'd lost, how long he'd been fighting this. But the ferry horn sounded, low and final. I stepped onto the boat. As it pulled away from Kuroshima, the island shrank into a dark shape behind us. The sea looked calm, almost innocent. The early light softened everything. If you took a photo at that moment, it would have looked like a peaceful travel postcard. I almost believed it. Almost. Halfway across the water, I remembered my camera. My hands moved before my brain could stop them. I reached into my bag and pulled it out. The screen was still dark, the battery still disconnected. The thing should have been dead, but when I pressed the power button, the screen lit up instantly. The camera app opened by itself, and in the preview, I didn't see the ferry. I didn't see the sea. I saw the festival ring on the island glowing under lantern light. The host stood at the center, wearing the pale blank mask again, red ties, still, waiting. Then the host lifted one hand and slowly removed the blank mask. Underneath was my face, again, perfect, smiling gently. And behind it, the crowd began to loosen their ties, one by one, as if dawn had finally arrived. I felt my throat tighten, not because of what I saw, but because of what it meant. The camera wasn't just recording, it was remembering. The host leaned toward the lens, close enough that my own eyes filled the frame. My mouth formed words. This time, sound came through. Faint, crackling, but real. "You chose a new face," my voice said from the screen, calm and approving. "Very good." My fingers trembled. I tried to close the app. It wouldn't close. "You returned what you borrowed," the host continued. "So polite, so careful." The ferry rocked gently beneath me. The other passengers remained still, masks facing forward, as if nothing strange was happening, as if they couldn't see my screen, or as if they didn't want to. I lowered my voice, barely a whisper, careful not to say my own name. "What do you want?" On the screen, my face blinked slowly. "Just to be remembered," it said. "That's all a face ever wants." Then it smiled wider, and the image glitched for a split second. Just long enough for me to see something unfinished beneath my features, something smooth and blank and hungry for definition. The picture snapped back. My face, on the screen, tilted slightly, like it was listening. And then, from behind me on the ferry, very close to my ear, someone spoke softly. Not my name, just a gentle, familiar phrase in my own voice, the exact tone I used at the start of my videos. "Hey guys," it whispered. "Welcome back." I froze. Because the sea was open water, the island was far behind us, and the morning light was bright enough to prove there was no place for shadows to hide. And still, I felt it. Not a hand on my shoulder, not a monster in the dark. Something much quieter, something that knew the shape of me. The camera screen faded to black by itself, as if satisfied. I didn't turn around. I didn't answer. I just kept breathing behind the mask I chose, and watched the horizon, wondering, with a calm that didn't feel like mine, whether I was leaving the island, or whether the island was finally leaving with me.